Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and this week's Bad Ideas is brought to you by our featured patron, Jen Goutreau. Thank you, Jen, for being a patron.
One of our longest friends on here, too.
We've got Tony bringing us the bad idea for this week. Tony, what do you got?
We're going to be talking about a very peculiar watch from the Swatch company called Beats.
Okay, like the vegetable?
No, as in sweet beets, as in dropping beets for a wrap or what have you.
Okay.
I said that in the whitest way possible.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I was just trying to wrap my head around this. To pull back the curtain, you did tell me the name of this ahead of the episode, because we've got to name our files.
Yeah,
And
but
you
that
said
didn't really
Swatch?
reveal anything to you. Yes, the Swiss watch company.
Yes. So I'm thinking it's a watch, and it's some beats. So maybe we're having an MP3 player watch, and I've got to say, I don't see how this is a bad idea, Tony.
Well, it is very far from an MP3 player watch. That's a common thing these days, like the Samsung Frontier, the Apple iWatch, and all that other stuff. This is trying to change the entire concept of time as we know it.
Okay.
As we enter a world with instant communication, the idea of time has become a bit more slippery, at least according to the Swatch Corporation.
I would argue that it has become much, much less slippery.
I mean, well, you'll see there are justifications for this here in a moment.
Okay.
Say you're trying to schedule a meeting in Bangkok from New York. Well, you better have a chart and some patience in finding out when everybody's going to be up for business hours. Enter the beat system from Swatch, which, by the way, they spell it .beat. It's always .beat.
Okay. Kind of like how Facebook is always lowercase.
Yeah, or how the Apple products start with a lowercase I, that sort of thing. No longer do we have to deal with 12 o'clock. No longer do we have to worry about AM or PM, or even fancy seconds. Swatch used the idea of decimal time, most closely based on French Revolutionary Decimal Time. The day would be broken up into 1,000 units, where each unit would be 1 minute, 26.4 standard seconds.
Okay. I'm starting to see what the bad idea here is, Tony.
So say your watch reads at 2:48. This would mean that you are 5 hours and 57 minutes past midnight. Well, it would mean 5:57 a.m. if you were in Switzerland, the new complete international standard for all time. This is called BL Mean Time, which is where the Swatch company is based and where they wanted all internet time to be based from that point forward.
Man, there's just so many problems with this. There's just so many. Can I start talking about the problems with this yet? Or are you gonna? I know you're gonna get.
I want to hear some of your ideas on what the problems
first of all,
are.
we already have time. We already have everybody's on board the seconds and hours and minutes train. We all understand that, okay? And then, let's say you are confused about time zones and stuff. There is a universal time that you can tap into. You can reference Greenwich Mean Time if you want to. It's already a thing.
Yep, GMT. That's the main one, but that's not where they were based. So they had to make it their own time.
Okay.
Plus, that's just a British-centric thing to have Greenwich Mean Time or whatever it is.
Please continue. It's as painful it is for me to hear this. Tell me how these people dug a horrible, horrible grave for themselves.
Well, to them, it would be the end of pesky time zones. Everywhere on the planet would function on BL Mean Time. So if it was at 2:48 in New York, it was also at 2:48 in Shanghai and at 2:48 in Johannesburg. Because the internet functions at all times and the business day needs to be fluid, we would share time and exactly be able to tell when something would occur across the entire planet.
It doesn't really save you from knowing when your person in Shanghai is going to be up.
Yeah, well, part of the thing was they thought that people were going to be switching to a more international time. They'd be up all hours and doing all this, and it would just be changing when people functioned based on Switzerland daytime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's this idea.
That's not going to happen, Tony. I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock, and it's going to be Central Standard Time.
All the while, Swatch would be dropping watches starting at $70 a pop to revolutionize time and the watch game as we know it.
Are these digital style watches or do they have hands?
The only ones I saw from Swatch were digital watches. I'm interested to see if they ever had like an analog watch for this, but I couldn't find one. I found some that were based on the old French decimal time period where it was like the 10 hours and everything, but it's sort of like that, but not quite. I did find some of those watches, but I never found one that was an analog of this.
When is this happening? Is my other question.
Is 1999.
Okay. That is telling, because if that had been like 10 years or even 5 years later, we would have been in the era where everybody has a cell phone, and the idea of buying a digital watch to do anything, and I'm saying this as a person that has a digital watch on his wrist right now.
Yeah, I've got a Fitbit. It's a digital watch. Yeah, but this is during the 90s tech boom. There were a lot of really bad ideas that got a ton of funding. I was reading about this one, and it was on a list with the I Smell device, which received $20 million. It would pump smells through the internet based on your what you were browsing.
The name on that one is the worst. Like, they're going to eventually probably get some kind of smell-o-vision happening, but I Smell, it ain't going to be called.
Yeah. Can't be I Smell, can't be You Smell. There's too many problems there. On this list was also something that sounded a lot like a Bitcoin-type currency that Whoopi Goldberg was promoting back in the day. It's like, if only they knew how cryptocurrencies would eventually become a thing whenever they wrote that article.
Yeah, wow. Actually, I was going to say, that sounds very, very current. I mean, I think there's definitely celebrities that are launching their own cryptocurrency now, so Whoopi ahead of the times.
Yeah, definitely. Before we get into some specifics, this isn't the first time the decimal system has been attempted for time. In some ways it makes sense. The simplified clock based around units of tens instead of 60 and 24. Like, I could see why that would be appealing to somebody who just thinks it's weird that we're doing a base 60, base 12. And this is going to be a kind of weird tangent just because I found it interesting how we came to the whole 12, 24, 60, all of those different ways.
How did we get there, Tony? I'm actually interested. I know half of this story, but tell me again.
All right. Well, first I want to talk about the decimal time. In 1792, after the French Revolution, it became mandatory to use a decimal calendar and time system. Part of this was to take out all religious and royalist aspects from the calendar. I read for a while how the calendar worked and just let it out a sigh and closed the tab. I think it was because of the awkward way they did leap years that sort of broke the system. Something about adding Frasiad fighting something else called a sextile. Like, basically, it was just a mess. And it lasted until Napoleon was kind of deposed. And that was the end of the mandatory decimal system there.
To be fair, almost everything about the French Revolution was a mess.
Yeah, pretty much. The timing aspect made more sense in some ways. 10 total hours with 100 of these extended minutes in each. It sounded like a cleaner system, and from 1793 to 1805 they did this, and for a very weird, brief 18-day period in 1871 during the Paris Commune, they did decimal time. It added some odd parlance to the day. Instead of saying it was noon, 5 on the watch could be considered 500 millidays, or 0.5 fractional days, and so on. So 88.4 seconds on a conventional watch would be considered 1 milliday, and supposedly this was supposed to make everything easier. The base time system that we have is a little bit awkward whenever you think about it. Like, the way that a lot of historians think we arrived at the 12 is because of the way the Egyptians actually did their counting. They used a duodecimal system, which is base 12 instead of base 10, because instead of using their standard 10 fingers, they used the knuckles on each finger. And whenever they were putting sundials up, they broke it into 12 because of this base system that they had.
By the way, counting with your knuckles, look it up, guys. It's fascinating. It's a really cool...
I didn't try it until I was reading this, and I'm like, that's actually kind of efficient, kind of cool. I like the way it felt. I was always wondering how like a base 12 system would work, and it made a lot more sense whenever I started trying it with that.
I learned about it from Squirrel Girl.
Does she have 12 fingers, or does she use knuckles?
No, she had a whole episode where she talked to people about different base number systems. It was a dream sequence. She had to defeat like puzzle-based monsters.
I see. Anyway, with these sundials, they naturally broke the day into 12 sections. And at night, it was generally measured by tracking 24 stars in their general position. Sometimes it was up to 36. Eventually, a device called a clepsydra was used, and it was basically a funnel that used water pressure. At the top of the funnel, you had the greater amount of water, and as the water pressure eased up from less water being in there, it slowed down, and you basically were able to make this 12-section funnel that made it so that the night cycle was evenly divided. It wasn't until the Greeks came along that they had a standard 12 units of day and 12 units of night that were exactly the same, because they kind of drifted hourly, because whenever the Earth would tilt, some days, the day would be longer, and they didn't have, exact hour keeping. And whenever the Greeks, and during the Hellenistic period, they actually broke this into 12 hours for day, 12 hours for night. And this was based on the equinox. So they just kind of kept with that, and that's when hours started to get a little bit more fixed.
Water clocks are fascinating, by the way. I know
it's like 1500 BC or something whenever they had some of these. It's a really cool little thing to Google. Just look up water clocks. At this point, minutes weren't exactly kept. That gets attributed to the Babylonians. They used a sexagesimal system, which is base 60, that was inherited from the Sumerians from all the way back to 2000 BC. It's not exactly known why the base 60 system was used for astronomy, but most people believe it was because it was easily divided.
Well, yeah, if you're using base 12, 12 divides by 5 into 60, so...
Yeah. So it's just the way it falls into it. Also the way that it divides so evenly with 1 through 6, it just breaks down really easily. So
by the way, I said that wrong. 60 divides by 12 into 5. I know how math works. Don't at me.
I mean, you should just add him anyway, at Albert_Berg. After all this, because of the developing longitude and latitude system for maps, we had each of the 360 degrees of the globe divided into 60 parts known as parts minutiae primae for the first minute, and then another 60 parts known as partes minutiae secondae, or second minute, and that's where minutes and seconds come from. And also, they believe that because of the way these maps were being drawn out, that's part of the reason why it ended up being, or why clocks ended up being round, and the way it was broken up into those minutes and seconds. This is all very much oversimplified. I'm wondering if you've heard any discrepancies in how you heard these came about.
It's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history compressed into something that everybody understands, which yes, it's probably an oversimplification of some of the stuff we're saying, but the upshot is, don't just decide to change something that we've been using for 1,000 years for no reason.
This is all getting a little bit overcomplicated for something that is so innate in us. It's pretty easy to guess, within a few seconds how long 1 minute's been. We've been using it for so long that, you actually have a sense of time. And to just expect people to switch is a little bit insane. Of course, now we have a time system based on atomic clocks, which relate to the 9,192,631,770 energy transitions of a cesium atom. So maybe we shouldn't judge metric time so harshly.
But it still translates into seconds.
Yes, it definitely does. It's just one of those things where it's we are getting very, very specific. Anyway, this idea entirely started when Nicholas Negroponte, the head of the MIT Media Lab in 1998, said, "Cyberspace has no seasons and no night and day. Internet time is absolute time for everybody. Internet time is not geopolitical, it is global, it is the future. Many people will see real time as internet time."
There is some truth to that. There was a clock that was started sometime in the 1970s for computer time that has essentially been constant throughout all of the history of computers, and it's actually possibly going to be responsible for what people call the second Y2K, when that clock hits a certain number of digits and can't roll over and rolls over to 0 because it's in the base of everything in computers. But that doesn't mean you have to buy a new watch.
And the analog watches handled Y2K just fine. And to be fair, most everything else did.
It's only for computers. You don't have to, come up with a new product.
Basing their ideas on this, the Swatch company developed their new Beats watch. They wanted to revolutionize time based on this idea, and also sell a whole lot of watches. And I think I covered this in the beginning. A beat was one of the 1/1000th of a day. That's where the entire name came from.
How many seconds is that?
88.4 seconds.
You did mention, okay, I remember the...
I don't think I called it a beat before. That's what the entire thing is based off of, the internet time, and every 1 mil a day is basically a beat. It's easier to say beat than mil a day.
At what point do they get Dre on board with this?
I think that he got on board a lot later. Someday they're going to put those watches into the headphones so you can just see it's just him dropping beats at 7:31.
Okay.
Which is 9 p.m. over there, but probably 1 p.m. here. I don't even know.
I'm very amused by my own joke, Tony.
Some people in the tech world decided to adopt this. A lot of the first 24-hour web companies would buy these watches in bulk and give them to all their employees, hoping to adopt a clean system for telling time across time zones. Lots of web apps were developed to change the time bar on a computer to display both times, and you actually still can find these clocks today. Like, if I look it up right now, at the time of this recording, it's at 8:49.5. So, like, the seconds are still kind of a thing there. It's just, like, you've got 3 digits that you're going through. But the main one is it's at 8:49. So,
and if you want to buy one of these watches, there is one currently on eBay for $19 under the Buy It Now tab, plus $12 shipping.
That would almost be a cool thing to own just to say, but I don't need more just stuff I'll never use in my life. They're not the most attractive looking watches either.
I beg to differ. This one looks pretty nifty.
I think I just saw the ones that look like cheap knockoff brand, like the Walmart $9 watch for kids.
Well, now let's not be besmirching the Walmart $9 watch for kids.
I mean, there's a time and place for it. Whenever you're 7 years old and you want a hyper green Ninja Turtles watch.
Okay, I'm feeling very personally attacked right now. Let's continue with the episode.
For the next few years, the sales would be dismal, and by 2003, the entire project was shelved. Apparently, there was some holdout adherence to the idea of decimal time, specifically the Swatch, but without a smartwatch, you will not be able to find these bad boys in Walmart or anywhere else. There are a ton of apps that will allow you to do this to your phone, though, because there are some holdouts. So if you want your Apple Watch to give you the at international time or the beats or whatever you want it to, you can set that up. It's just a weird little thing where you have to go and download it. In 2015, the Swatch company put out a very silly cartoon on YouTube. It's only got like 4,000 hits or something like that. But it's a very silly 2000s style animation, like, you know, the old Newgrounds type stuff where there wasn't much moving and it was very low quality. But this was specifically poking fun at themselves. It had a British person calling an American friend wondering why he wasn't up at 4:16 Swatch beats. In the rest of the world, it was nearly noon according to the beats, so why wasn't he running on that? After some not so nice threats, the conversation ended by slamming the phone down. Then the British guy calls up his friend and he's like, I don't understand it. Why don't people get this? What time is it? And he calls his friend and he's like, it's 4:16 Swatch beats. And he's like, but what about in Shanghai? It's 4:16 Swatch beats. And then they go for a little while and it ends with the title card saying, you don't have to understand it, just use it.
You said they were poking fun at themselves, but it sounds like they were still trying to advertise their watch that was very, very bad.
Maybe it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I like that they at least put something out about it and acknowledged that it was a weird little mistake from back in the day.
They acknowledged that you couldn't understand it, that's for sure.
The bad idea here is pretty simple. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. We have a time system that is thorough, well understood, and works. It had potential, but the units of time people have used for their whole lives have become second nature. This would be way harder than trying to get American kids to understand the metric system. This is like an entire world-changing thing that just simply isn't going to happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talked about the French experiment with this, and when the French tried to do it, as bad of an idea as it was then, at least they're insulated into one country, and you don't have these sort of constant international connections. And the very thing that Beats was trying to solve, I think, ultimately is the thing that would stop you from being able to do this, because unless you get a majority of the globe on your system, you're not going to change people's way of doing business. Whereas maybe in one country, without the internet, you might be able to, by fiat, create a new time system that people could actually all use.
Yeah, and to be fair to them, a lot of these watches had both the standard time and the beats time on it. So you could still tell what it would be and then figure out what it would be in somebody else's time zone. It wasn't just at 40, like at 481 or something like that. But it's still just such a weird system to expect people to adjust to.
Did all of the watches have the little ampersand symbol on there?
It seemed to be that way whenever I was looking at it.
I've already elaborated why I think this idea is terrible, Tony. People couldn't figure it out for themselves, but I'm just kind of still in shock.
I think that's everything I have to say on this particular watch. I was trying desperately to find quotes from CEOs and like executives from Swatch, but I think they just kind of let it die and didn't say anything about it. Like, there were a few people talking about how it was a great idea, but those weren't people from the Swatch company. So I was a little disappointed I couldn't find that, but I think that's the sum of this idea as we know it.
Well, at least they were smart enough to let it go when it was time.
Yeah, they only pushed it for a few years. A few people were saying that if they would have put the infrastructure and really pounded that advertising, it probably would have taken off. I don't believe that. But hey, they tried something new. They probably sold a fair amount of watches.
Well, that'll do it for this week, folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, tell a friend about it at whatever time that you feel like telling them, on whatever time scale that you guys are using. If you have a bad idea that you'd like us to cover, send it to badideasshow@gmail.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave it as a comment or tweet us at Human Echoes. All of those are good ways to get a hold of us, and we will see you guys next week with another episode of Bad Ideas.
Have a good one.
Bye.